For a literary critic, temporality is a notion essential to any text analysis. After all, stories and plot lines unfold over time, just like creative works are embedded in time frames, which are instructed by historical, political, cultural, or economic configurations. A first, very general observation would need to acknowledge the difference between narrative time and time told. In drama, for example, both tend to be almost identical, whereas narrative time can exceed time told in modernist fiction. And in pragmatic texts, such as reports or chronicles, narrative time might be shorter than time told, since irrelevant facts or events might be omitted. In other words, it must be distinguished between what happens on the level of plot and on the level of presentation. In this vein, French critic Gérard Genette has made the distinction between story and narrative, indicating the difference between the time implied by the chronological happenings of the story and the time that reshapes that story in the telling. The way in which time is presented in literary discourse must not necessarily be chronological. On the contrary, continuity might be deliberately disrupted. Real time can be blurred by expansion, segmentation, compression, etc. While time is traditionally conceived as a quantitative means to measure the succession of moments, the notion of temporality comes into play once the subjective perception of time, the personal experience of time, is addressed. Subsequently, temporal estimations can be made without referentials such as a calendar or a clock. Since the experience of time has changed over the course of time, literary texts from different periods offer different readings of time. Thomas Hood's realist poem, The Workhouse Clock, 1837, reflects the kind of time discipline that distinguishes not only the social organization in the industrial world, but also an entire society's understanding of time. While the stream of consciousness technique that determines the modernist works of James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, or Marcel Proust is based on a non-linear, discontinuous concept of time that relates to the inner mindscapes of the protagonists. Private and public time collide in Ulysses, Mrs. Dalloway, or À la recherche du temps perdu. And post-colonial studies have unveiled how in the wake of colonialism, different temporal configurations were allocated to different peoples. Prolonging a progressive understanding of time, a Eurocentric concept of civilization became a marker and a metaphor for cultural difference. It should also not go unnoticed that in literature time and space are inseparable entities. Stories are located in physical environments at given moments in time. Russian formalist Mikhail Bakhtin has therefore introduced the concept of the chronotype into narrative theory in order to show how settings of time and space are represented in language and literature. Moreover, he has attributed different configurations of time and space to different literary genres, thus underscoring the specific narrative character of each genre. Dramatic texts operate with chronotopic frames that vary from those of prose works. All this suggests how complex the problem of temporality is in literary discourse. It is not only content, but also form that matters. Themes and topics need to be communicated in an appropriate aesthetic way, whereby the different layers of time need to be arranged convincingly in order to make the text plausible for the reader. According to my understanding, temporality can be conceived as a normative construct in literary discourse which is, however, open to changes in paradigm, as different historical periods offer different notions of temporality that come to bear in the respective works. As suggested above, and as becomes particularly visible in post-colonial literary studies, diversity entails different time conceptions. In response to some of the additional questions, I would like to point out that with the advent of the digital age, the experience of time and space, and thereby the notion of temporality, have changed significantly. Spatial and temporal distances can easily be overcome by electronic technologies. Digital life knows no morning and night. It happens simultaneously. The distinction between work time and time private has been obscured. Clear-cut demarcation lines are blurred. The question is whether this might be conceived as the end of temporality or whether it fosters a new understanding of temporality. Finally, as regards the current pandemic, it becomes only too obvious how differently social, political or medical systems are constructed, how efficiently or inefficiently they operate, how strong or weak the sense for a communal or selfish handling of the coronavirus is, and how differently individual groups are affected. Social and ethnic belonging have become prime markers for the efficiency of the virus. The pandemic shows only too well how diverse the world is.